Hello, everyone. Oh, thank you. I'm Dr. Jessica Turner-Scuff, the Associate Director of Science Communications here, and I am just, what a great crowd today. Really appreciate, if you're like me, you are super excited about spring, and this talk is a great way to herald it. It is now my great pleasure to introduce Pandora Young. Pandora Young is a senior land steward who has worked at Longwood since 2005. They started as a horticulturist for Pierce's Woods, a display garden showcasing species native to eastern North America, where they worked for 18 years. For the last 4 years, they have been a member of the Land Stewardship and Ecology team, helping care for nearly 750 acres of our natural landscapes. Pandora is passionate about connecting people with plants and fostering healthy, more resilient ecosystems. I can personally say Pandora is an incredibly engaging speaker, phenomenally knowledgeable, and if you haven't already, you will absolutely be in love with spring ephemerals by the end of this talk. Thank you.
Thank you for that lovely introduction, Jessica. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me today. This is my first time speaking in the ballroom, and it's a humbling experience. Yeah, and I'm really happy to get to share with you all today some amazing plants that I love. And I hope you, if you don't love them already, that you leave today loving them as much as I do. So it is nearly here. I imagine maybe you saw that this talk, even the concept of spring returning to the icy, snowy land that has been Pennsylvania this winter made you want to come. And spring is an exciting time in our woodlands. It's a floral eruption, and we're going to talk about it. So we're going to talk about what is a spring ephemeral, spring ephemeral seed dispersal, some of our most common spring ephemerals in our region, how to grow them, threats to them, and how we can help them. So, what is a spring ephemeral? I think of this as a group of plants that parties hard for 2 months, and then they gotta sleep for 10. What does that mean? Well, ephemeral means fleeting or short-lived. So in our deciduous forests in early spring, sunlight is abundant until the canopy closes, and sun is plant food. Spring ephemerals take advantage of that brief window of opportunity when it's warm enough to grow, but before they get shaded out, to come up, flower, and go to seed, and then go dormant once the canopy blocks out the sun. They typically bloom before their foliage has fully expanded, and it's like the desert erupting in flowers after our rain, but we get this special treat not just on rare rain events, but as an annual event in our woodlands. And any day now. So, not all spring wildflowers are ephemeral, but many of them are. True ephemerals have what I think of as a set bedtime. No matter how good things are, they're going to be fully dormant by summer. There's also a group that I'm going to refer to as situational ephemerals, and these are species that if the party still has food and beverages, they will stick around longer. Though they will cease actively growing, they will linger. But they will go dormant in an area if the growing gets too hot or dry. So who loves spring wildflowers? Woo! Who loves ants? So many of our spring ephemerals depend upon forest ants to disperse their seeds. This is your vocab word, myrmecochory. Myrmecochory is seed dispersal by ants. So this is a winnow ant, and winnowing is when farmers separate seeds from husks, say removing the seed of wheat from the wheat husk. That's called winnowing. Likewise, winnow ants remove husks from forest seeds. Winnow ants do not want to live in your kitchen. They want to live in the leaf litter in the forest where it's moist. and where they perform an important ecological function. Species dispersed by ants have what are called eliosomes, another vocab word, on their seeds, and that pink arrow is pointing to one of those. They're a fleshy appendage that is rich in fatty compounds and proteins. And that is what attracts the ants. The ants don't eat the seeds, they go after that eliosome. So without these ants, many of our spring ephemerals could not successfully spread or reproduce, and they would fade from our woodlands. So let's appreciate the ant, the humble ant. Can you spot the ants at work on this trillium? This is a trillium that I was watching in my own garden, and here, I'll help you spot them. There are 3 on this one, and they were going into the seed capsule of the trillium and grabbing the seeds. And ant dispersed seeds, going forward in this presentation, I'm not going to mention it for every plant, but this ant icon will indicate plants that are dispersed by ants. Plants by ants. Ants find the seed rapidly. They go after them very quickly, so it can be hard to catch plants with seeds on, ripe seeds on them. And ant-dispersed seeds have a dramatically reduced survival rate if allowed to dry out, because they're used to being collected right away and then taken underground. This is how these plants get their seeds planted underground for them. And not only that, but wood ants produce large quantities of formic acid in their venom gland, which they will spray to defend or disinfect their nest. So we, as humans, we have our antibacterial soaps to clean our environment so we're not spreading diseases. Ants try to keep their nest clean. They're very tidy creatures. And in so doing, they may also protect the seeds of our spring ephemerals, which are also in this moist, damp environment where fungus likes to grow, from the seeds themselves rotting and dying due to getting a fungal pathogen. So, yeah. All right, now let's get to know some of, it was really hard to narrow down the list of spring ephemerals because there's so many I love. So I really wanted to focus on ones that you can see yourself if you walk in the many great trails we have in our region. So let's get to know some of our common ones. Spring beauty. This is one of the first spring ephemerals to bloom, sometimes as early as late February. I haven't seen it blooming yet, but I have this one planted in my yard, and I've been keeping an eye on it, and it's about 1 inch long, and it's got buds on it already. So, and if we're supposed to get 70 degrees on Monday, and before I know it, it will be open. So this is a true spring ephemeral, and its flowers are white and typically streaked with darker pink veins. And I always think of this as, because it gets up so early in the spring, it's like bloodshot eyes of someone who has woken up too early. It only grows 3 to 6 inches tall. So like many of the spring ephemerals I'll be talking about with you today, it is best appreciated on your knees, getting on its level. There is natural variation within species. So note the spring beauty on the top right lacks the pink veination and just has the white petals. They are open on warm sunny days and they close on cloudy days and at night. So some plant foliage may emerge reddish with reddish purple bronzing, but usually turns green over time. So in the bottom right, you'll see it's the same plant, but there's some purple foliage right next to some green foliage. And you'll see that in other species of spring ephemerals. Spring beauty thrives in shaded, patchy lawns. I often see them. Granted, a lawn is not necessarily its natural habitat, but that's under trees in a patchy lawn. It lacks competition, so it's able to spread out, and it's not being smothered by anything. So there's probably bits of bare soil in between bits of lawn, and that's important for its specialist pollinator. So spring beauty flowers are visited by a variety of insects. Among them is this specialist pollinator that gets its name for the plant that it pollinates. Spring beauty mining bee specializes in pretty much just visiting this one species. So where some pollinators are generalists going to many types of flowers, others, like this one, visit one or just a few species. This flower also has pink pollen, so the pollinators that visit it get dusted. It's very magical. They get dusted with pink dust. So, yeah. Pennsylvania is home to over 400 species of native bees. And the spring beauty mining bee gets its name because, like a miner, it digs a tunnel. Its home is in the ground. And 70% of our native bees make their homes in the soil. Now you think ground nesting bee, I've stepped in one of those nests, that seems bad. Almost all of our native bee species are solitary. So it's one bee, one hole. Bees that live in hives are sort of an exception, and they get a lot of attention because this is very noticeable when you interact with them. But solitary bees tend to be very gentle because they don't have a hive to defend. So here's a picture of what one of those holes looks like, where the bee will lay its eggs, and when the spring beauty goes dormant, so too does the bee. And its eggs will also, like the ephemerals, be dormant until spring comes and they emerge. And this looks like a big ant hole, but this is actually the top of the home of a spring beauty miner bee, or there are a lot of other mining bees. So, and if you watch these holes, you can see small bees traveling in and out of their nests, or sometimes just hanging out right at the entrance. So, here we have bloodroot, which I see around quite a bit. It is in the poppy family. Has very big flowers for a spring ephemeral. They're about 2 inches across. And here are some other parts of it. Where do you store all your energy if you party for 2 months and are dormant for 10? Where do you store your moisture and nutrients? Bloodroot has a rhizome. A rhizome is a modified, thick underground stem. And in the case of bloodroot, where bloodroot gets its name, it has a bright red sap that looks like blood if you break it open. So, and the foliage is odd. It has these irregularly rounded lobes. And you can see in the top right, that is one of the seed capsules with the eliosomes that the ants go after so quickly. This is a species that typically goes dormant in mid to late summer, but it may stick around if conditions are favorable. And one of my coworkers described it as like a vampire. It lasts longer than other spring ephemerals because of its blood. So having like little ways of remembering these things, I thought that was funny and it stuck with me. So Dutchman's breeches is in the same family as bloodroot, the poppy family, so they're related. This is a true spring ephemeral, and I love its flowers, which resemble tiny inflated pairs of pants hanging upside down on a line. This species has a very special relationship with the eastern bumblebee. So the eastern bumblebee is a generalist pollinator, so it will visit many flowers, but nectar foraging queens, their emergence is synchronized with this flower's bloom. They emerge as this flower is blooming. And this flower is pollinated almost exclusively by the common eastern bumblebee. They use their long tongues allow them to reach the nectar that is produced at the tip of the spurs. So that would be where your ankle comes out of the little pant leg, while they sit at where the waist would be, and they stick their tongue up. And honeybees, which don't have long tongues, they can pollinate the plant, but they don't have a tongue that can get the nectar. They can only reach the pollen, which is in the waist area. So Dutchman's breeches and squirrel corn are closely related. They have almost identical foliage, but their flowers are different shapes. So we've got the pants, and we have squirrel corn, which has flowers that look like hearts, where someone has taken the bottom and started peeling it a little bit. And it gets its name from its specialized roots. So Dutchman's breeches, it has these very pink fleshy scales, and squirrel corn roots really do look like squirrel buried kernels of corn in the ground there, those little yellow tubers. Very interesting looking. The yellow trout lily has lovely yellow reflexed petals. I feel like I usually see this in low flat areas, in floodplains. Typically, when you see a colony of this plant, you only see a small percentage of the plants in that grouping in bloom. And that's because it takes 7 years for a trout lily to store up enough energy to flower. Think about that. If you are only actively growing 2 months out of the whole year, it can take time to store energy up, which is important to keep in mind. It can be very easy to damage spring ephemerals when they're actively growing. And thinking about the spring beauty in my yard that's only an inch tall, if I were to step in the spot where it's coming up right now, which I can barely see it, that would be a major setback for that plant. So non-flowering trout lilies produce a single leaf, and flowering plants produce 2 leaves. And they get their name trout lily from their smooth foliage that has this irregular modeling on it of maroon, brown, and gray-green splotches that looks like the speckled side of a trout, especially when you see a whole mass of them together. It looks like a bunch of trout all swimming together. So white trout lily on the right is a more uncommon species in Pennsylvania and pretty much impossible to distinguish from yellow trout lily unless you can see the flowers. Their leaves look so similar. The trout lily is an early pollinator plant, and it has a specialist bee associated with it, the trout lily bee. And its seeds are ant dispersed. Its fruit is this fleshy, triangular-shaped capsule, and it stores its energy in a bulb-like corm, which is also modified stem that's at the base of the plant. And as this plant starts to go dormant, it looks like white noodles in the ground, like over the ground and under the ground, and those are horizontal stems that will then go down further into the ground and produce new corms. And that is how the plant is expanding its colonies. But it's interesting to see on the top right, if you see little white noodles on the soil surface in late spring, you might be seeing the trout lilies spreading out. Okay, so in my personal opinion, Virginia bluebells, to me, they're one of the loveliest. I love them all, but I think this is one of the loveliest of our spring wildflowers. It is a true ephemeral, and it is truly a giant among our spring ephemerals, standing at 2 feet tall. So you don't need to get onto your knees to truly appreciate this one. Because it gets so large, when it's going dormant, if you're growing it in a garden setting, I recommend pairing it with a native shrub that leafs out later in the season, so you can appreciate the flowers, and when the leaves start yellowing, that's when your shrub is leafing out, and it helps hide the dormancy process. They have very long tubular flowers that they start out with pink buds that turn blue as they open, and it's no surprise that this species also attracts long-tongued bees, like the Dutchman's breeches. So here's 2, just to appreciate how long these tongues are compared to the heads of the bees. It helps to get a close look. All right, now we have cutleaf toothwort. The common name for this plant is from its roots, which have tooth-like projections on them. And this plant is in the mustard family. It has deeply cut foliage, and it has some relatives that you will also see around, though cutleaf toothwort is the one I see most frequently. And I think it has showier flowers than the 2-leaf toothwort in the middle here. However, it is more ephemeral than 2-leaf toothwort. 2-leaf toothwort sometimes emerges in the fall and then will remain present through winter, only going dormant in late spring as things start to get too hot. But they're both lovely ground covers, and you might be familiar with their relative, hairy bittercress, which is a common introduced weed, which has explosive seed capsules. So if you've ever been weeding in your garden and gotten hit in the eye with a seed while you're doing it, it was probably hairy bittercress, which, like I said, introduced species, and is an annual, whereas cutleaf toothwort and 2-leaf toothwort are perennial, so they're not trying to produce as many seeds. If you're an annual, you need to ensure the next generation by producing a lot of seeds. So you won't get hit in the eye by cutleaf toothwort or two-leaf toothwort. And then this is another one of our tiny ones you want to see on your knees, the rue anemone. It may be tiny, but it blooms and blooms for a really long time each spring. This is a picture of it bloom. You can see it's blooming before the leaves have even really started to expand at all. It's all flowers and the leaves are all still very tight. And here are some of the other spring ephemerals that have anemone in their name, though none of them are, well, only one of them is the anemone genus, if you're looking at the scientific names. Anyway, these are three very similar looking species. They're all typically about 6 inches high, and the easiest way to tell them apart, I think, is to look at their leaves. So we have the rue anemone on the left, and its leaves have very shallow lobes to them. And then the false rue anemone in the middle has very deep leaf lobes that go almost to the base of each leaf. And then the wood anemone has completely separate leaflets that are in groups of 3 or 5 that are all joined at a single point. So, yeah. And then another similar tiny one that has multiple leaflets, we have dwarf ginseng. But this plant has a cluster of, instead of single flowers, has many tiny flowers all connected at one point, like a little pom-pom. Dwarf ginseng's tiny round tuber is about the size of a chickpea. You can see it resting in my hand there, very round. And each plant has 3 leaves that circle the stem at the same point. And then each of those leaves separates into either 3 to 5 leaflets. And you might be wondering, is it related to the common medicinal plant, American ginseng? Yes, it is. It's like a miniature version of that plant. The dwarf ginseng is only 3 to 8 inches, whereas American ginseng grows 1 to 2 feet high and is not ephemeral, and it gets this lovely red fruit on it. All right, so maybe not for beauty, but this would be my favorite spring ephemeral for flavor. Not that I eat a lot of our spring ephemerals, but wild leek is very unusual in that its leaves come up in spring without any flowers. And then in early summer, after the foliage, because it's ephemeral, after the leaves go fully dormant, that's when its flowers emerge on their own. So these little like circular pom-pom flowers, which look like if you grow ornamental onions, it's the same flowering structure. Their foliage reminds me of lily of the valley, but has a strong oniony fragrance and is used culinarily. However, I'm always hesitant to, I would want to grow it myself because knowing how slowly it grows. I talked about how slowly spring ephemerals grow. And the non-flowering plants, just 1 leaf. Each plant, just 1 leaf. Flowering plants, only 2 leaves. So, and growing in the shade, being a spring ephemeral, it takes a long time for these plants to spread. We have 38 trillium species in North America, 8 of which are native to Pennsylvania. Some trillium species have very narrow ranges, occurring only in a handful of counties in the US. While ants are really good for seed dispersal success, they're not known for long-distance traveling. Each ant may only travel a couple hundred yards. So trilliums are situational ephemerals. They will linger. And many of these species can hybridize between themselves and other trillium species, which can sometimes make identification tricky. But largely they can be put into 2 groups, sessile and pedicellate, which I'll talk about. So, sessile trilliums have a flower that sits directly above their leaves. The leaves and the flower are touching, so it is held like it has a neck brace on, the flower goes straight up. Sessile trilliums also tend to have mottled leaf foliage, which you can see on these. It usually, when they first emerge, very strong mottling, and then that tends to fade before they go dormant. These two here, yellow wake robin has yellow flowers, and the flower has a light lemon fragrance, which suits its yellow flower color, which you really have to get down there and in the flower to get that scent. The little sweet Betsy has a scent that is sometimes described as spicy. Some say like a banana, or others say slightly fetid like a wet dog. So to each their own. So here are some of our pedicellate trilliums, whose flowers don't stick straight up because I think pedicellate think on a pedestal. They have a flower stem. And that allows the nodding trillium to get the award for most bashful of our trilliums, with its flower hanging down below its leaves. And the large flowered wake robin has these big white flowers that fade to pink. Here is another pedicellate trillium, the red trillium. These are both red trilliums. Now, they have different common names, but this is the same species, but the regular form, the red one, and the white one is just a white form of the same species. The way to distinguish the white wake robin from other white species of trillium is the dark ovary that's in the center of the flower. Other white trilliums will not have that dark center. And then to talk a little bit more about fragrance, the red trillium and little sweet Betsy, their fragrance, which is only noticeable at short range, this won't ruin the scent in your garden should you want to grow them, but is interesting. These flowers, odor and color, can also be described as similar to rotting meat, and the color especially. And that is because they are attracting pollinating carrion flies and beetles, which is not a bad strategy if you bloom in early spring, because flies and beetles are active at much lower temperatures than bees. So we're gonna appreciate the ant, we're gonna appreciate the fly and the beetle, as well as all the bees. Where to see spring ephemerals at Longwood? Two great places are Pierce's Woods, which is part of the display garden showcasing plants native to eastern North America, and in Forest Walk down beyond the Lookout Loft Treehouse. And I would say you could come every week during the spring and see something new in bloom, because it's always changing. New things are coming up, new things are coming into bloom. We do a lot to steward our spring ephemerals here at Longwood. Here is your speaker for May, Ellen, who I am lucky to be co-workers with. And Ellen is among a sea of trout lilies, taking data on them. The Land Stewardship and Ecology team, which I'm a part of, has collected data on 48 species of native spring ephemerals across Longwood's natural lands as part of our baseline plot sampling. This work gives us a clear picture of our current spring ephemeral populations on the property, so we can see how they change as we continue to monitor them over time. We also want to grow our spring ephemeral populations. I use the data from our plot sampling to see, hey, what is a species we don't have, or we don't have a lot of, and we have in one area, but maybe it would also do well here. So I look for those opportunities to add spring ephemerals to the landscape. I've got a plant order coming in March 20th, and I'm excited to get about 1,000 more spring ephemerals into the ground this spring. We're boosting biodiversity of our woodlands, which in turn supports biodiversity of the insect species that depend on those plant species. And that, in turn, boosts the populations of the things that feed on those insects, so whether it is birds or other wildlife. So here I am. Well, I'm not in this picture. I'm taking this picture of the team that is helping me on a wet spring day. We are planting bare root spring ephemerals. I appreciated the wet weather on this day because planting them bare root, I can see those underground structures, so I'm not planting anything I don't need to, and like potting soil, whatnot, and they come in a bag. That's a bag of roots there, and having a wet day keeps those roots from drying out. If we didn't have a moist day, I would probably keep them in a bucket of water with a little water on the bottom or a wet paper towel. But we're using cafeteria trays to separate out the roots, and yeah, so successful planting. Another strategy that I employ for planting spring ephemerals is it can be easy in a landscape to forget where these plants are because they're not there for most of the year. And to avoid accidentally stepping on a spring ephemeral as it's emerging, I like to interplant spring ephemerals among evergreen ferns, which can help protect them. As the new fronds emerge in spring, the ferns will also help hide yellowing foliage as ephemerals go dormant. Evergreen ferns can help protect ephemerals from foot traffic that's hard to see. So what I will usually do is I'll plant ferns one spring, and then the following spring, in the gaps between those ferns, then I'll plant the spring ephemerals. It sort of lets the ferns get established for a year. And if I don't have evergreen ferns around in an area that I want to plant spring ephemerals, I will try to find some nice, somewhat straight sticks that have fallen from the trees, and I will make little plant stakes, and I will put those in the ground in front of where I plant my spring ephemerals. So they don't distract the eye too much, but by putting them between where I would walk from a path into a planting bed, it's a sort of a warning that catches me before I step on it, and it can also be a way for me to check in on, okay, I see that stick that's straight up there. Is something coming up there? So I can look at the success of the plantings I've done. So I try to pick a stick that will last a full year at least. So if you were to walk through the forest walk and see some sticks in an area, it was maybe me and my wonderful volunteer team having planted up an area. Another thing that we are doing to protect spring ephemerals in the landscape is by managing introduced species impacting these plants in our region. So these are some major groups. The flowers of garlic mustard and lesser celandine may look very pretty in the landscape in spring, but what you are not seeing is a diversity of plant species, which means it's not supporting a diversity of pollinators and other life. Other introduced species of shrubs, I'm highlighting burning bush here, but barberry, bush honeysuckle, and multiflora rose also are species that have not co-evolved in this region and leaf out earlier than our native shrubs. And if you are a plant who's depending on 2 months of solid sunshine in the forest understory, and suddenly there's a shrub leafing out above you earlier than that, that is going to impact your ability to be successful. These are all species we manage. 2 wonderful volunteers going after garlic mustard with me, Garen Rich. Spring ephemerals are also impacted by high deer populations, which can severely reduce their populations. In my home garden, because I don't have deer, because I live in a highly populated area, I try to grow a lot of species that I know deer would go after, because hopefully I can support insects that might be struggling in areas that are dealing with a lot of invasive species and deer pressure. So this is what garlic mustard removal looks like on a large scale. We have been focusing our management efforts for the last 5 years and are continuing to do so in areas where we have high biodiversity. You can see the before and after of the pull. Everything you see in that after picture, all the green, all native species. Yeah, a native woodland species. And I believe that given how much effort we've put into it, last year was a year where I was like, I feel like we've really made a difference because we're moving through these areas faster than we did before. It feels like there's less, and that was very encouraging. So in addition to pushing out native species, other impacts that certain introduced species can have that aren't necessarily apparent in supporting wildlife. One example is the garlic mustard, which I mentioned. The Western Virginia white butterfly, which despite its name, we are in its native range. Its young feed on the leaves of toothwort, which is in the mustard family. And so it's a larval host species. And with larval host species, if you don't feed the babies, you don't get adults. It's as simple as that. So you're not going to see this butterfly, and this is a butterfly that is threatened, if you have a lot of garlic mustard, because garlic mustard is also in the mustard family, and this butterfly will lay its eggs on garlic mustard. However, its larvae will be killed eating the garlic mustard foliage. So it's what is sometimes referred to as an ecological trap. And another species that I wanted to mention to watch out for, that's an emerging species that we found in 2 locations working on eradicating, and I have seen on trails in this region, so keep an eye out for it. The foliage of this plant, the incised humort, it looks a lot like the Dutchman's breeches and the squirrel corn, very similar foliage, but its flowers are this lovely blue, and this is a species that produces a lot of seed. It can fling its seeds. It has explosive seed capsules, so it can fling those seeds pretty far, and the USDA has classified it as a high-risk invasive species. So I have seen it in the White Clay Creek watershed. Keep your eyes out. And what I do when I see it is I log it. Does anyone here use iNaturalist? See a couple hands up. iNaturalist can be a useful app for identifying species, but also as a way of engaging in citizen science. You can log locations where you see different plants, native, introduced, but my hope is if I were a land manager and I saw that someone had logged a picture of this species in area, I would go and check out that area and manage it. So you may be able to help with land management efforts just through taking pictures and logging things with your phone. And what else can you do to help these beautiful flowers thrive? You can manage invasive species. Enjoy from afar. Don't pick or step on spring ephemerals, and never dig them from the wild. The only time it's okay to dig plants from the wild, and Longwood has done this, is when there is a road being built and you want to rescue a plant that would otherwise have a road paved over it. There were a lot of plants that came to Pierce's Woods as the result of a roadwork project. Let's see, and plan for pollinators and dispersers. So in the case of supporting your woodland ants, leaving the leaves. A lot of creatures, including butterfly larvae and caterpillars, can overwinter in those leaves. Luna moth caterpillars, if you've never seen a Luna moth, leaf litter supports them as well. And you can support solitary ground bees by not mulching every inch of your landscape, leaving some bare soil and not assuming that thing that you think is an anthill that you think you don't want. Give it a chance. Could very well be a solitary bee that is appreciating spring ephemerals in your neighborhood. And then you can also, especially for learning about how to manage invasive species, I recommend you come back in May for Ellen's talk on how to protect native plants, including our spring ephemerals. So thank you so much for your time. Coming soon to a woodland near you. Are we looking forward to spring now? Yes? Thank you for coming.